In Mass Effect Andromeda's multiplayer, you are part of an Apex team, the best of the best the Nexus has to offer. While not a regular group of soldiers, they are nonetheless talented individuals that take on the most dangerous and important missions in this new galaxy. In this series, we are going to take a look at the various class builds for the various characters in the game's multiplayer. So with that in mind, I'm Darcblade, and let's take a look at the next character in our series of Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer class guides, the Batarian Scrapper. As always, remember that these guides are aimed at the harder difficulties in the game and are aimed at level 20 rank 10 characters or above. This is because at rank 10 you should have all of your ability points to spend. One of the more recent characters added to the multiplayer, the Batarian Scrapper, may on paper look like a weapon-based soldier class, but in fact his abilities all combined make him a very deadly power user. Now as such, I spec the Batarian Scrapper as follows. First, with Concussive Shot, I maxed this out going up to rank 6, putting points into anti-armor over anti-shields. Now there is a balance between shielded and armored opponents in the multiplayer, but I took anti-armor because the damage increase is more than anti-shields, giving you 125% instead of just a plain 100%. Next, with rank 5, I put points into direct damage and force over radius. This is because I want the damage of Concussive Shot to be doing its most, and rarely will you have enemies grouped up close together. And then with rank 4, I put points into recharge speed over repeat concussion. Now while on some classes I prefer repeat concussion, I went with recharge speed. This is to keep it in unison with Snap Freeze, the second ability of the Batarian Scrapper. With points in recharge speed, both abilities normally come off cooldown at a very similar time. Next, with Snap Freeze, I go up to rank 6, putting points into degeneration over anti-armor. Whilst the anti-armor buff is nice, degeneration affects all enemies, reducing their overall damage against you and your teammates. This buff lasts for 15 seconds, which is also quite a long time. The enemy doesn't actually have to be frozen to have this debuff on them as well, they can just be chilled by Snap Freeze. Next, with rank 5, I put points into Brittle over duration. Brittle is a nice debuff that makes all enemies take 20% more damage from you and your teammates when they are frozen or chilled. And then finally with rank 4, I put points into Reach over damage area. This is basically to increase the range of Snap Freeze, as its range is also its greatest weakness. Next, with FLAK Cannon, I maxed this out going up to rank 6, putting points into Shredder over FLAK. This allows FLAK Cannon to put a damage over time effect on enemies affected by the ability. With rank 5, I put points into Stunning over anti-armor. Again, the stunning effect from FLAK Cannon comes in very useful, especially on the harder difficulties. Being able to stun your opponents helps out on both the offense and defense. And finally with rank 4, I put points into Power Cells over damage and force. This is simply to allow me to use FLAK Cannon more often as a stunning tool rather than a direct damaging tool. Now for the passives. With munitions training, I'd go up to rank 4, putting points into powers and melee over weapons training. This allows all my powers to deal more damage and increase my power cell capacity. Now if you did want to max this out, especially if you were focusing on making this character a weapon-based character rather than power-based character, I would go up to rank 6, putting points into Sustained Fire if you have a rapid fire weapon, or Precision if you have a slower firing weapon, and then at rank 5 I would put points into Weapon Efficiency over Melee Synergy. And then with Combat Fitness, I got up to rank 4, putting points into Health and Shields over Melee to give me more survivability. If you did want to max this out, dropping points elsewhere, I would advise Hold the Line at rank 6 and Defensive Positioning at rank 5. As for weaponry, it doesn't really matter what you take so long as you don't go over that 100% recharge speed. As for your gear, go with something to either increase your recharge speed, power damage, or survivability. Now let's move on to the heart of the episode and talk about the moves and abilities available to the Batarian Scrapper. The first is Concussive Shot. When used, the Batarian Scrapper will fire a homing high impact round that when it hits an opponent deals a fair amount of damage to that target. On top of that, it will knock down unarmoured opponents, such as enemies with just red health bars. As Concussive Shot is a homing ability, it can be arced around walls and cover so long as the enemy is highlighted. However, this takes a little bit of getting used to. Concussive Shot is also a detonator ability, meaning that if a target has been primed through yourself or one of your teammates, you can activate yours or their combo through Concussive Shot. Now with other characters, with Concussive Shot, I tend to prefer Repeat Concussion, which basically removes any cooldown on Concussive Shot and instead replaces them with power cells, making them almost like a grenade powered ability. It also increases the damage against knockdown foes. However, I chose instead to go with recharge speed, keeping Concussive Shot on a recharge timer because it fits in well with Snap Freeze. meaning that the two abilities will be on a similar cooldown to one another. On top of that, also thanks to the Batarian's melee attack, which I'll get onto later, recharge speed became the more sustainable option for this character. The next ability available to the Batarian Scrapper is Snap Freeze, at the moment the only character to have this ability. Once used, the Batarian will send out a jet of ice from their Omnitool that will flash freeze any enemy within its range. Unprotected foes will be completely frozen, and enemies with armor will have their armor weakened, meaning they'll take more damage. All enemies will take even more damage if they're affected by this, thanks to the brittle augmentation. They'll also deal less damage to you from the degeneration augmentation too, so this benefits you and your team. Snap Freeze also deals a fair amount of tech damage to opponents as well. Targets who are affected, as in frozen or chilled, will be primed for cryo combos as well, which can then be detonated with Concussive Shot. This ability is really good when it comes to crowd controlling, debuffing the enemies and priming them for combos. Its greatest downside though is its range, but you can work around this by fighting in choke points or corridors. Being able to freeze as many opponents as possible is key to this ability, as it only takes a second for an enemy to be frozen solid. It means that you can pretty much spray Snap Freeze over multiple opponents even if they're not grouped up together. However, you'll have pretty much just a second to do this. Afterwards you can activate combos with Concussive Shot and your melee attack, but I'll talk about that later. Targets won't remain chilled or frozen forever though, and they will eventually thaw out, so keep that in mind. But hopefully by the time they've thawed out, if they're not dead already, then you'll be able to use Snap Freeze again. The next ability available to the Batarian Scrapper is FLAK Cannon. Found on other combat characters, this causes the Scrapper to fire a Krogan designed shell that bursts into shrapnel upon impact with a surface or target. This deals fairly substantial damage, but the shrapnel damage is reduced against armoured opponents, enemies with yellow health bars. On top of that, with the way I have it spec'd at the moment, it will leave a damage over time effect on opponents who are affected by the FLAK Cannon or its shrapnel. On top of that, and more importantly why I've taken the ability, is the stunning augmentation, which allows you to briefly stun enemies. Although it's only 2 seconds of a stun, it's still enough for you to get a breather. Firing FLAK Cannon into choke points really does come in handy. The FLAK Cannon does have a firing arc though, so you kind of got to get used to this. It's not as bad as grenades, but there is still an arc nonetheless. The biggest downside of the FLAK Cannon though is it's a power celled ability, meaning that you have a finite amount of power cells, and once you're out you can't use the FLAK Cannon anymore until you get to an ammo box to resupply. However, this can also be an advantage in some respect, as it gives you the option to do a lot of burst damage to enemies, if so desired. But this will use up a lot of power cells if you do so. Now as for the passives, with munitions training I've focused solely on increasing my power damage and power cell capacity. Being able to increase the damage of Concussive Shot, Snap Freeze and FLAK Cannon means that rarely will you get time in between all three abilities to really focus on your weaponry damage. Thus I found power damage the better option here. If you did want to go for weaponry instead of relying on power damage, you could drop points possibly in FLAK Cannon, or if you so desired, Concussive Shot. I wouldn't advise dropping any points in Snap Freeze though. As for combat fitness, I've taken everything to increase my health and shields to their maximum potential. Everything after is just damage reduction, especially when you're in cover. Weaponry, like I already said, it doesn't really matter too much so long as you keep that 100% recharge speed. Now the Batarian Scrapper is the first Batarian added to the multiplayer. He comes with large amounts of health and a slightly above average shields. He also has a dodge and hover mechanic fueled with his jetpack, but on top of that he comes with a unique melee ability, the Batarian Gauntlet. The Batarian Gauntlet is a slow melee ability. It has a large wind up and it can feel like forever, although to be honest it's only about a second, but it's a lot slower than some of the other melees in the game. However, the unique aspect of the Batarian Gauntlet is that the melee punch itself is a detonator, meaning that you can detonate combos with your melee attack. This also links back to why I've taken recharge speed in Concussive Shot over repeat concussion. For if you're able to freeze multiple targets with Snap Freeze, you can use Concussive Shot on one, and if there are any targets left alive after the Snap Freeze damage, the Concussive Shot damage, and the cryo explosion damage that are still frozen or chilled, then you can create another cryo explosion through going up and punching them with your melee attack. The Batarian Gauntlet by itself is fairly strong, it's stronger than average melee attacks, but if you're able to create a combo through it, it comes in very useful. Now if you don't have a rank 10 level 20 Batarian Scrapper, I would first advise maxing out Snap Freeze. After which, focus on munitions training and your combat fitness, and then finally Concussive Shot. Then if you have any points left, start working on FLAK Cannon. Overall I was quite surprised by the Batarian Scrapper, he's quite a powerful character. Not only is he quite tanky in terms of his survivability, and this is even without maximum points in combat fitness, but he's also able to provide a fairly large damage output, but more importantly, he's able to debuff enemies. Snap Freeze is a wonderful ability, despite having a short range. Being able to freeze, debuff, and even crowd control enemies with it makes him very useful, especially on the harder difficulties in the game. He's also able to put damage over time effects and stun effects on the enemies thanks to FLAK cannon, and then his damage output comes from his concussive shots and combos. And if there are any gaps in this, you can use weaponry or your melee attacks. Normally I use the abilities in a rotation of FLAK cannon to stun and apply a damage over time effect on enemies, follow that up with Snap Freeze to debuff them, freeze them or chill them, and then follow that up with concussive shot. If there are any left and they're still frozen, then I will try the Batarian gauntlet melee attack and then follow that up with weaponry. However, if there are a lot of them left, I will go back to using FLAK cannon and repeat this rotation over again. The Batarian Scrapper really is a useful character, and on the harder difficulties he can really be a backbone to a team. Anyway, I hope you found this guide helpful, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a Mass Effect Andromeda Multiplayer class guide to the Batarian Scrapper. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.